Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. We are back with another wrap-up video, which is my September reading wrap-up for the Horror Challenge. From our lovely graphic, I am still making my way through the monster section. September was all about werewolves. Of all the monsters, werewolves are probably my least consumed content, both in book and movie. I tend to find werewolf stuff a lot of repetitive. I just am not that interested in it. So, not gonna lie, this was a little difficult trying to pick out books and movies to watch and recommendations, just because I, again, haven't read or watched a lot of this stuff. So, in September, I read a total of 5 werewolf books. Cycle of the Werewolf by Stephen King, set in the isolated town of Tartar's Mills in Maine. Over the course of a year, a werewolf makes itself right at home, striking fear in all of the residents. This was all right. This is a graphic novel from Stephen King. It's divided into months, so like each chapter is a month. I thought that was a pretty unique way to do it because you kind of get the sense that this is just like dragging on, and just when you think it's over, it's not. And so, you know, obviously a lot of the residents are feeling that, so you kind of are experiencing that along with them. And plus the weather changes of the seasons throughout the year kind of brought its own challenges on top of kind of dealing with the werewolf, so that was pretty interesting. The graphics were good. I thought it added to the story. The story itself was all right. You know, we didn't really do anything new to the werewolf trope. It was kind of just your traditional werewolf story. Coyote Rage by Owl Going Back. Once every 7 years, representatives of all the tribes of the Great Council travel to the sacred gathering. Animals and men sit side by side, but Coyote has been secretly devising a plan that would do away with the rule of man. Raven, secretly hearing of this plan, decides to try to stop Coyote and vows to protect Luther, who is a representative of the tribe. He's on the side of the men. As well as Luther's daughter. So I really enjoyed this. I loved the interactions of man and animals, and there are some werewolves in here, but they consider themselves shapeshifters, and they're more coyote and wolf as opposed to like the full werewolf. Luther is Cherokee, and while I can't speak on the representation part, I loved the intermix of culture that's kind of woven throughout the book. There were some really great action scenes, and I thought the story moved at a solid pace. I think there's also some obvious commentary on like the violence of man towards nature, which is kind of what drives this whole plot. I think there's also some commentary just about there being good people still among man, you know, not leaving the fate of the whole race to a single group of people. Luther himself faces racism and abuse, both physical and mental, throughout the book, but you know, he still believes that the human race is worth fighting for, which gives it a little bit of a hope feeling. Now, I didn't give this the full 5 stars. I'm gonna be a picky bitch here for a second, so you know, brace yourself. I will first say that the ending is an open ending, which I don't mind. And I think if you look at the ending in of itself with no other context, I think it's very solid. I like it. I thought it was beautiful and happy, and I liked how it all played out. Now, with all that said, if you look at the ending with the context of the rest of the book, it feels a little disjointed. The focus and the goal of the whole book, like, is made pretty early on, and it never wavered from that, but then the ending is all, like, that's all just kind of, like, shoved to the side, and now we have a completely new goal. You know, the completionist part of me really wanted at least some closure for the other part. Maybe the new direction is supposed to signify closure. I don't know. It didn't feel like that, but I guess you could say that. All in all, I did enjoy this. I thought it was a perfect pick for my subgenre. I will say that there are some animal abuse scenes and a pretty graphic suicide scene. So if you're triggered by any of those, please tread lightly. A Beastly Business by John Blackburn. We follow Bill, who is in need of some money and happens to come across someone looking to hire him for a job. What's that job, you say? Well, it's cleaning out the basements, which happens to have a very dead, hairy man named Henry Oliver. This was an okay read. I think the premise sounded so interesting, and although I was expecting a little more action with the treasure hunting part of the plot, it kind of just seemed to be a little slow moving. The book isn't that big, which was surprising because it certainly felt lagging in some spots, and for me, I thought it took a while to, like, get going. I would say the werewolf aspect was kind of in the background, almost like a subplot. They reference it a lot, but you don't get, like, much actual interaction with the werewolves as characters as you would think for a werewolf book. Next is Feral by Matt Serafini. Jack and Ellen decide to spend the summer out in western Massachusetts. Upon arriving there, they found out many people have gone missing and others have a big craving for meat. I did not care for this. At first, Jack's love interest turns out to be, this quite mysterious, and I liked that. I thought some parts with the werewolves were pretty horrifying and graphic, which, of course, you'll love to see in a horror book, But, oh my god, the sex. It is so freaking much. Like, this is literally werewolf porn with some father-daughter incest, like, sprinkled in there. Oh my god. Like, freaking move along, people. I think this is the first book in a series, and I have zero interest in continuing on. Yeah, no, definitely not. And last book is The Werewolf by Alma Katsu. This is set in Germany, 1945. Uwe is recruited by the village bully to join a resistance group preparing to fight the Allied soldiers. Then Uwe witnesses the group's transformation. So this was the audiobook that I had for the month of September, and I quite enjoyed this. Alma Katsu is just the master at combining historical fiction with horror. This, to me, is how I think werewolf stories should be. Like, just downright terrifying. The transformation scene was intense, and you really feel for Uwe. You get the fear of, having to stare this wolf down and confront it and live with that. It's a pretty short audiobook, but it's so worth the listen. I think the narrator did a fantastic job with it. Now the movies. Oh man. So I have 4 movies that I watched. Well, I'll say that I painfully watched. First is Werewolf Island. After an attack on his nephew and nephew's girlfriend, Detective James decides to investigate and solve the decades-old curse of Dog Lady Island. Yeah, it was rough. This was originally pulled off of a list. I think I got that was like low-grade horror movies, and I would completely agree that this was low-grade. The acting was just horrible. I couldn't even get into the story. I don't even think I ever felt like scared for the victims or engaged enough to like care if the detective solved the crime. I kind of just watched it because I didn't want to have to pick something else. But yeah, it's a painful 2 hours I'll never get back in my life. Next is Werewolf. A group of young journalists camp out at a government facility they snuck into in an effort to uncover a conspiracy. And as you can imagine, things don't go as planned that night. So this wasn't as bad as the other one I watched, but I also couldn't wait for this to be over. I think it started out good. The werewolf attacks were pretty gory in here. And I'll be honest, there were a couple of good jump scares. But yeah, not a movie I see myself recommending, like, ever. Also, side note, I had trouble finding this movie, and I found out that it's actually also under another name, Silverhide. Some of you might be more familiar with that, but in any case, probably still sucks. It's bad. But anyways, moving on. An American Werewolf in Paris. So I think this was like a take on the classic American Werewolf in London. Obviously in Paris instead of London. But yeah, didn't like this one either. 3 American friends travel to Paris, and one of them finds himself kind of enamored with a Paris woman who is not quite as she seems on a full moon. Yeah, so like a third of the way through, I contemplated just turning it off. There was just honestly nothing I was enjoying. Well, that's not true. The opening scene of the guy running at the opera, that was pretty good. I liked that, and I got that point, I was like, ooh, this is gonna be a good movie. And then the rest of it started, and I was like, ooh, man, I was wrong. Yeah. Yeah, I have no other words. All right. Werewolves of the Third Reich. A group of American soldiers uncover a plan by the Nazis to create an army of werewolves. Okay, so out of all of the ones that I watched, this was the one that I liked the best, though I still had trouble, like, getting through it. I think I felt the most, I'll say fearful with this, and the storyline moved at a decent pace, and there were some graphic scenes, and obviously, because it's a storyline with the Nazis, like, there were some pretty horrific scenes that didn't have anything to do with werewolves. So that was kind of hard to get through. One thing I hated is there's like just a lot of like villain speeches and like dialogue between characters. I'll say intense altercations in dialogue. Like, people fighting, but they're like, I don't know, almost like in a battle determine who's better and more badass. I don't know. Like, I get it. You're tough and trying to make a point. Move along. All right. Now let's talk about my werewolf recommendations. We'll do books first. I have 4 of them. First is Mooncalled by Patricia Briggs. This is the first book in the Mercy Thompson series and the first werewolf book I ever read. I never made it through the whole series. I think there's like 13 books. But this is about Mercy Thompson, who is a shapeshifter who shifts into Coyote, but is no longer part of the pack. However, after an incident has unexpected consequences, she kind of decides that the only place she can turn to help is through the pack. I really enjoyed these. Like I said, I didn't get through the whole series, but I really liked, I think I got through like 5 or 6 of them. I really liked them. Mercy herself is kind of a badass, doesn't really take any shit from anyone. I like her interactions with the pack, and there's a bit of a romance that was just a nice touch. I think this is kind of the werewolf horror equivalent of like a cozy mystery for the horror genre. So if you're into that kind of thing, give this one a try. Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. I'm gonna just straight read the synopsis because it ties it up pretty good. He was born an outsider, like the rest of his family. Poor, yet resilient. He lives in the shadows with his Aunt Libby and Uncle Darren, folk who stubbornly make their way in a society that does not understand or want them. They're mongrels, mixed blood, neither this nor that. The boy at the center of Mongrels must decide if he belongs on the road with his aunt and uncle, or if he fits with the people on the other side of the tracks. What I like most about the story is that it's kind of more of a coming-of-age approach to a werewolf story, which I don't think you find a lot of that type of plot in the werewolf trope. So that was very interesting. There wasn't, when I think of werewolves, I think of big, scary animals that rip people's face off. And this is not quite that type of werewolf story, though you do get some of the behaviors of an animal and all of that, mixed with just trying to survive in regular society. So I think there was some conversation about, people dividing and trying to figure out, where you belong within society that kind of has you pegged a certain way. This isn't my favorite Stephen Graham Jones, but I'm recommending this because I still like what he did with the trope. So, yeah. I think this is an older one of his too, but... next is Wolfland by Jonathan Jantz, which is about a group of people who come together at a high school reunion when something horrible happens. A werewolf attacks. I read this earlier this year, and I thought it was pretty good. I liked that it was more from the narrative of the people going through their changes and kind of their impact to each other and dealing with obviously something traumatic that they all experienced, as well as the trauma of themselves changing and kind of fearing what they're changing into and how they're reacting and all of that kind of goes into that. And I thought it was good because it kind of, like, this traumatic experience, like, draws them together and then draws them apart, and then it all comes together again in this kind of explosive end. Which, if you've been following my channel, I do like a big monster-y showdown, so this certainly had that. And lastly is Breed by Chase Novak. Alex and Leslie are at the end of the line as far as having a baby, and they come across a very experimental procedure that they decide to try as a last resort. Leslie ends up pregnant with twins, but she pays a steep price. So I read this a long time ago, and I remember loving it, but I recently reread it earlier this year, and I did not like it as much as I remember. But I'm still recommending it because it does get some good reviews, and I know there's an audience out there somewhere for this book. So, a lot of this book is with the kids when they're older, and kind of on the run, which I think is not really what I expected nor wanted the focus to be on. I think I was wanting more of that good horror story, in fear of the wolf, which I think we would have gotten more if the story was kind of just them trapped at home. And you do get the werewolf, but it's more subtle. You know, and it doesn't come right out and say a werewolf. You're kind of left to piece it together and kind of come up with your own conclusion as a reader, which is actually one of the things that I did like about this. It's kind of makes it very mysterious and ominous at that aspect. So, all right, so that's it for the books. Let's go over the movie recommendations that I have. So right off the bat, I'm cheating a little bit and putting a TV series on here. And that's only because I think it's very underrated. And that's Hemlock Grove. This is ultimately about two boys from very different families and very different backgrounds that become friends looking to solve the murders around the town. Now there's so much more that goes into this, but I'm leaving a lot out because I think some twists you just need to experience. And although I'm putting it under the werewolf category because I think that's really the main plot, I mean, there's a lot of other monstery stuff that makes a scene here. You know, you've got your mad scientist and angels and demons and vampires, and, you know, it kind of all plays into it. But plus it has a Skarsgård, which, you know, you should really just watch it because of that. Next is Underworld: Rise of the Lycans. I mean, I included Underworld with the vampires, so I can't not include this one with the werewolf section. In this world, Lycans are werewolves. This is the second movie of the Underworld franchise, and it goes back to the story of Lucius and his vampire bride that they kind of touched on and alluded to in the first movie. I really enjoyed this one. I thought the backstory was really necessary for the plot. I got a lot more into, like, the battle of the werewolves versus the vampires, which they didn't really give you in the first movie. So, and I thought it set the stage well for the rest of the movies. But I would still recommend watching the first movie before this one. You know, give yourself a little teaser. The Wolf of Snow Hollow. A police officer, well, I'll say a really stressed out police officer, gives in to the paranoia of the rest of the police force and town when a wolf starts killing the locals. So I really enjoyed this. I know it gets mixed reviews, and I can see why. The main guy, like, is freaking stressed out to the max, which makes his character, I think, very unlikable. And it really shows. But I mean, it's kind of hard to watch at times, but I don't know, I thought it added a little to the story. And I really liked kind of the mystery behind everything, and the final reveal was a good one. And lastly, now I don't want to hear any negative comments about this, but my last recommendation is Van Helsing. Yes, you heard me right. I mean, this is a classic vampire versus werewolf curse movie, and I love it. I remember thinking it was kind of long when I first watched it, but then I watched it a bunch of more times after that, so clearly it's not too long. Plus it just has a great cast of actors, and I really liked the graphics and the setting and Dracula's castle. Oh, I would like to move into Dracula's castle, but I don't have the money for that. Yeah, so that's it. Some 4 short ones. That's all I have for this video. I had fun getting to read and watch more werewolf content. Drop a comment below and let me know what your favorite werewolf books and or movies are. Stay tuned for October, where we get back to the classics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.